you to one of my videos that I want to address quickly. Essentially, the comment was this. Something along the lines of, why aren't more teachers talking about the somatic or the embodiment? Why do they stick to all there is this? There's nobody here. There's nothing here. That's it. But the comment went further and it said, well, what if these teachers develop some somatic chronic pain like I did, or an illness that was caused, at least in part, by trauma or emotional repression. The comment asked the question, would that change the person's teaching? Would their teaching become more somatic then if they had to deal with something like that? And I don't know. The answer is I don't know. Because the mind has clever ways of explaining things away. And you can see that with a lot of the teachings, that's what they're doing, is just explain things away. Like, that's not real. None of that is real. There is no self. What are you worried about? That pain, that's just an arising. Don't worry about the body. There is no body, and there's no self in the body. So why bother? So that's pretty easy to say when you're not in a lot of pain. I said that for years in one way or another. Because when there's no pain, so like right now, there's no pain. Even after 3 years of really big pain, now there isn't pain. So yeah, I could come back and just say, it's all illusion. That pain that you're experiencing, not real. The self that seems attached to it, not real. Just explain it away for you with really fancy non-dual language. But that wasn't helpful during the pain. That's what I want to say. And so by me developing chronic pain, I got to see in a different way. Like, I got to see that the people coming to this work that might sit in my meeting or come to these videos, where they're coming from is they're listening to the non-dual teachings talk about presence or no self or whatever. But what they have going on is that their stomach is at all kinds of issues with it, or their chest area is so contracted that the teaching just sounds like some ideal that they don't experience because they're focused so much on pain. Or like, I had that experience of, yeah, I mean, it's easy when you're not in a lot of physical pain or contraction just to say there is no self, because without pain, the awareness realization is rather blissful, rather peaceful, or it can be rather empty. So I think that the commenter is probably correct in saying that, look, if you're a teacher or you're someone who's realized, or you've realized your true nature or whatever, whether you're teaching or not, you're kind of lucky if you don't, I guess you could say, if you don't have to deal with that kind of somatic energy issue. Or, yeah, I would like to know, actually, when we look at there's so many teachers, for example, who had chronic pain. I heard someone compile a list of those teachers. There were quite a few of them. I know Krishnamurti and other ones had chronic pain, headache, backache. Several have died of cancer and other issues. Many teachers have died really earlier than a lot of the people in your family. What am I saying around all that is, we're probably going to discover there's more to this than we see. That's what my thought is about this. This whole somatic thing is a way into seeing something that has previously been unseen in the non-dual teachings, or not talked about much. I would love to have sat down with, for example, someone like Jay Krishnamurti, who I think would have been totally open and say, look, let's explore your chronic pain. Let's explore it, because I know you're open. Let's just explore it. And then given the things that I saw with my chronic pain, I'd be surprised if he didn't find some of those things. Why would we think that a teacher, for example, is immune from repression or unresolved trauma? Why would we assume that? Well, maybe because if the teacher, whoever that is not referring to that in their experience, if they're not mentioning anything like that, if they're going through a process where they're seeing that their pain or something in their somatic experience is old identification, they may or may not share that with us. So then we're left with these stories of teachers who died with this condition or that condition, and apparently didn't get resolved, and they may have died from that condition, and it raises all these questions. I mean, the basic thing here is that teachers are just people, so they can contract any disease or any kind of chronic pain. To me, the question is, what does one do with that, or how does one look at it? If I were sitting down with Krishnamurti, if I could find just any network of thoughts for him that was connected to the chronic pain, it seems like he would have been open just to observe it and see it, and maybe even conjure up some more of it and observe and see that. I'd be hard pressed to think that his chronic pain had nothing to do at all with the mind because of what we now know about the mind body connection. I mean, Dr. Sarno really blew out of the water for me, Dr. John Sarno, the idea that the mind and the body, with regard to these physical things, are not connected. Like as if it can just be physical, whether it's an illness or a headache or pain. Now, let me put a caveat to that. I am not saying that everything that shows up or manifests physically is the result of some emotional, psychological, spiritual thing. I'm not saying that. Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying, because I've said that many times. And people still come back to me and say, so you're saying that everything physical is actually just emotional? I'm not saying that. But what it feels like is that we've pushed everything into the physical that manifests that way. So there's an assumption going on that we don't investigate very often, which is that there's a physical manifestation of an illness or chronic pain or something somatic. And some people, there's just an assumption. That's physical. It's outside the scope of inquiry, or it's nothing for awareness to discover there. It's just this thing that I have to manage. But what if that's not the case? And how would you even know until you started the discovery? So this question that came was like, why aren't the teachers explaining what is going on for them in their experience and refining their teaching and making it more somatic? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know because they're not sharing it with you. So it would be all speculation. At this point in time, we can all, though, take responsibility for our own experience, right? Like, even if your particular teacher didn't provide a map for you to deal with the somatic thing that you're dealing with, it doesn't mean that you can't explore it. It could be that that teacher didn't have the insight there, didn't have the skill. It's very possible. I didn't have it 5 years ago. If you would have said to me, hey, there's this pain in my back, and I think it's connected to rage or something, I'd be like, good luck with that, because I have no idea how to really tap into that. Because if you feel into it, it probably just feels like pain. And probably there aren't a whole lot of stories around it, or maybe some stories. And you can clear those stories, see through those. But the assumption for me was, well, the pain will probably still be there because it's physical. I could have easily gone down that road. I'm so glad that I didn't. I'm just now, getting the words to explain all this. It's all new for me in the sense that there's how all encompassing realization really is. I think it's just opened my eyes to this more than ever. So I'm just trying to put language to it. And I imagine in a few years I'll have better language. But all I have now is that Literally everything gets included. And to be really radical and to have a beginner's mind is one would turn towards whatever's arising to be curious about it instead of just categorizing and explaining it away as like, oh, I just have headaches or I just have cancer or irritable bowel syndrome, I get a liver issue. You see, and then by categorizing it that way, it's to close our awareness off to it right there. The discovery or the investigation from inquiry or from awareness just doesn't happen then because of how we categorize things. So I would like to go back to some of the old teachers who had diseases that were manifesting and chronic pain and say, you know, could it be that at least part of this is connected to something that's not resolved? And are you open to look at that with me? We'll both look at it together. It'd be interesting to see which ones would say yes and which ones might just try to explain it away. There's different ways to explain that stuff away. One of them is just explaining it away the way science does. Like, okay, that's physical. It's not spiritual. It has nothing to do with ego, seeing through ego. You have a physical manifestation there. So we categorize that away and exclude it from the investigation. But another way we do it in spirituality is we categorize it a different way. We say, well, that's just an arising. That's just pain. That's not happening to anyone. And in that, we close off the investigation. Just through the same mechanism of explaining something away. And the way we language things is everything. So just imagine this, for example. This can be really dangerous, actually. This is loosely based on a real story, although I'm just kind of changing some of the facts so you can see how dangerous it can be. Let's say someone comes to a teacher and says, I've got this issue, this reoccurring pain in my hip, and it's getting really bad, and there's nerve energy with it shooting down my leg or something. And I've been suicidal over it. And I'm considering somatically exploring that to see whether is it connected to emotion or repression or trauma or something, shame or something. And the teacher says, oh, don't bother with that. None of that is real. So those are words that actually came from a teacher's mouth around somatic processing. So imagine that student then listens to that and then just categorizes that away like that. And then doesn't enter the exploration because they're following the teacher, trusting the teacher, not to mislead and yet the teacher comes and explains it away like that. And so that person loses the opportunity to explore that and therefore embody whatever is there, to integrate it, see through it, and even maybe heal. That doesn't happen because they're following the advice of the teacher who just explains it away. If you follow the advice of your doctor, they'll do that too. They'll explain it away. Say, this is physical, here's your treatment. Here are the known treatments for this. But all those scenarios are sending a signal in some way, don't explore that. Stop. If someone would have said that to me, I don't think I would have just listened to them, but you can see the danger in that because with the chronic pain leading to suicidal ideation for me, the last thing I needed to hear was someone just explaining it away in a way that wasn't congruent with my experience. So the doctors tried to explain it away as physical, and then I just heard things out in the spiritual world like, again, it's not happening to anyone. It's just an arising in awareness. Be with it as it is. And both of those things were showstoppers. So it's good that I didn't listen to them. And instead, I just said, okay, no, I'm not going to listen. I'm just going to take a look and see what's actually there. There's a power in just saying no to all those voices and saying, instead of taking on your belief, your belief doctor, or your belief, or your framework teacher, instead of just taking that on as secondhand knowledge, I'm going to say no to that and I'm going to explore and find out what is actually there. And that's a process of direct experience and skill. So it's just like that. It's like excruciating pain was happening for me. These different places, these different factions were trying to stop the investigation by explaining it away. And just I said, no, thank you. Let me see what's really there. And then as I started to, with skill, investigate, lo and behold, there was stuff there. The spiritual program can be exceptionally stubborn, exceptionally stubborn. I watched someone who has had a non-dual realization go through a very serious illness, and the person was really, really resistant to an investigation, completely resistant. And I saw the person buying into the medical model completely and struggling from that. There's a reason to go to the doctor, and I tell people continue to go to the doctor even if you're doing this work. You really should go to the doctor. Don't, because you don't know what it is yet. If you go to the doctor, good science, you'll at least explore that so that in case it is physical in some way, unconnected to the mind, then you're going to deal with it that way. But this particular person was very, very resistant to the explorations and suffered because of it. But spiritual program can be very stubborn, and it has partly to do with the resume. So the mind thinks, oh, I've already seen that it's all one. I've already seen there's no self. I've already seen that I'm not the body. I've faced my grief. I have faced my trauma, all that. But what if you haven't faced it all? What if, because our mind is clever, it'll say things like that to explain away and stop an investigation. It'll say, I'm beyond all that, or that can't help me, or, and then there's the stubbornness. It takes a real sort of vulnerability and true beginner's mind to just say, okay, forget everything that's ever happened to me, forget everything that I know, everything, and let me just do a fresh investigation here. Forget that I'm enlightened or I'm not enlightened, or forget I'm a teacher or not a teacher, forget all of that. Forget that it's all one, forget that there's no self. When it comes to the somatic, it's like the body doesn't care about any of it. Because if the body holds, keeps the score, if the body remembers a painful identification from the past, that identification is going to be just like the identification in anyone else's body. Stubbornness. What's unfortunate then, though, is that sometimes the teachers are stubborn about it, and so it's like they're infecting all of their students with that stubbornness. By explaining something away, they deprive people of the opportunity to go deeper with these pithy spiritual sayings like, well, it's all illusion anyway. Yes, it is. But what's my actual experience? Is there some aspect of my experience that is not being seen as illusion? Like for me, it was anger repression. That showed up in the chronic pain as something that was an old identification. Like I can't express anger, and I didn't see it. Why should anybody be deprived of the opportunity to investigate freshly? Secondhand spiritual knowledge doesn't help us in the somatic investigation. Secondhand spiritual knowledge, or even our own insights, so all of our own understandings of the nature of reality and all of that, really, when it comes down to the investigation, don't help. But maybe that's where the stubbornness comes from, is that the mind has taken on, even if the mind says it hasn't taken on some of these concepts as a way to explain things away, because the seeing was profound. So maybe they had a deep recognition of the nature of reality as all one, and then that's seen, but then the mind then interprets it and hangs on to the interpretation so that if something shows up later, the interpretation shuts it down. See what I mean? Just shuts it down. And I've seen this. For example, with the teacher who said that's all illusion, that's not real. Why would you investigate that? Meanwhile, the person is in excruciating pain. Excruciating pain. And how does the insight, it's all illusion or there's no self, help that person in pain right then? I mean, like maybe as a 0.02% chance that somehow hearing that will just shift them out of the identification with that pain or that illness or the repression or the trauma under it. But that's almost like magic thinking to rely on something like that, like some pithy saying that you say it and then somehow I don't see it happening that way. I think what's happening for some people is that you all have the intuition that perhaps this thing in your side or your stomach or your heart is connected to something old. You have that intuition, but you're stopped in some way, maybe even by your own teachers. To be honest with you, I might have stopped you years ago, innocently, in a session with you. Let's say an illness issue or chronic pain came up. Maybe I would have categorized that as just a sensation. Can you be with the sensation? Just rest with that. Not able to see that there are identifications in there and therefore not able to guide you there. I think that probably did happen. So it's not just me pointing the finger. It's like, I was doing that. So I know what it's like to be stubborn. Really stubborn, actually. So stubborn that I hid an anger repression from myself. Probably by saying things that anger is just another arising, let it be, see that it's not you. That kind of non-dual talk. Yeah, we need to be able to discern on the path, to be able to discern. And part of the discernment is recognizing when there's someone in our experience who acts as a showstopper, someone who, because of their framework and way of thinking about things, influences us. Teachers, doctors, therapists, whoever else, influences us to stop or to not be open to really discover what is here in our experience, and instead will give us just phrases or insights or pointers that don't really get to the issue. Who are the showstoppers in your life? And do you even know that they're showstoppers? Do you know that they did that for you? A teacher, a friend, an author, a doctor, therapist, coach, someone who decided to be in your life and to try to explain away your experience somehow with their framework. And in listening to that, you got stopped. And so you're still in pain, for example, or you're still dealing with an illness that maybe has some emotional roots, but you've stopped. And you've been told by someone who influences you, there's no reason to go into that because, see what I mean? I surrounded myself with stoppers, and I didn't know that. A lot of the non-dual teachers were showstoppers for me. Not all of them. My doctors were showstoppers. They stopped the investigation, or they didn't intend to do that. But by the language that they spoke to me, it's like they're sending the signal, don't bother. This deeper deepening that happens it's almost like you just have to say, fuck everybody. Everybody. I'm actually going to investigate and see what is here. I'm not going to let other people decide for me what's actually here. I'm going to find out for myself. This is really the spirit of the new model and the Kiloby inquiries, where we take responsibility, so to speak, for everything. and we stop relying on people outside ourselves to tell us about our experience or what should we be seeing in our experience, but instead finding out what we actually experience and investigating directly from awareness what is here. It's easy for like the aliveness of this realization of this work to get lost in favor of really dead concepts that are showstoppers, just dead concepts. Repeated spiritual phrases that stop us from actually looking to see what's here, that literally stop the beginner's mind. Can you be that open to disregard the people in your life that are stopping you? And then actually investigating. Let me just let you in on a few things here. So, a slew of people have been coming to this work who have illness and chronic pain and somatic issues. And I have not yet found one of them that didn't, that to where that this conditioned programming wasn't playing a part of it. In other words, in every single case that I've seen so far, conditioning was playing some part of the illness or chronic pain, some part, even if it wasn't the whole thing. A good deal of the suffering came from unconscious programming. So if all these people who have chronic pain are experiencing this, that it's tied to old programs, identifications, like why should anyone else be different? So if a teacher shows up with chronic pain, why do we assume that that's not an unconscious identification on a certain level? Why? Why would, because the person has said that they're enlightened, because they've read books? Because the body doesn't care about those books. The body doesn't care about any of this stuff that I'm saying. All it knows is like, I'm not safe. Stay away. I don't trust people. I hate my mom. All unconscious, showing up as illness or chronic pain. It's been a real eye opener to see just how deep this goes with people, how much thought, programming, and emotion, even if repressed, is playing into these illnesses. So I guess one thing that I do when I'm speaking is like making sure that I'm not throwing out any showstoppers. Like anything that I say, I don't want it to be held on to in a way that makes you think, that stops you from looking in your own direct experience at what is really here, your own investigation. So although I say a lot of things, the invitation here is to look. That's really the only invitation here is, do you want to investigate? If I start saying, well, here's what you'll find, you'll definitely find this, or don't even bother with the investigation because here's what's really going on, and explaining that away, I'd be influencing you in some way. So if anything, it's just like pulling back anything that I'm saying or doing that might make you not open, and then just cultivating that openness. It's beautiful to live that open where you're literally open to investigate anything. There's a wide openness in that that is liberating. And that isn't stifled or throttled by old concepts like spiritual programming. Like when there's a real, oh God, what's the word? Earnestness towards just being open to experience. then there's no place in that for those dead concepts. The dead concepts really start feeling dead when you're open. It's like thank you, but no thanks. That phrase, spiritual phrase, is not what I'm interested in right now. I'm investigating this, seeing the nature of this. What is still being believed here? I don't need the concept coming in. It's that kind of attitude. What I see people doing with this work is literally taking responsibility for what they believe. And it's like what they're doing essentially is like thanks but no thanks to all the dependencies that I've been dependent on this teacher and this teaching and this thing and that thing and this thing. And even if I become dependent on this inquiry thing, then the inquiry would focus on that too. So, are you following me here? So, yeah, that's what I notice with people doing this work deeply is that their dependencies start falling away because they're standing in their own experience with skill, not just as awareness, but with the skill to investigate. And when you start doing that investigation for yourself, all of the information coming from the outside is kind of like secondhand knowledge. Even if it matches your experience in a certain way, even if what I'm saying resonates with your experience in a certain way, it's still a poor substitute for your direct investigation for yourself. Here's what I mean. If I would have listened to a talk like this before the healing of the chronic pain, I might have said, yeah, that resonates. But the real work happened when I started to investigate myself. So that information is helpful just as a context. Now I just went in to find out what's really here, and that's where the healing happened, is in the direct investigation. Whenever you hear yourself explaining something away, take another look at it, right? Listen to how our frameworks explain things away. So just listen to how you talk, because the beginner's mind gets snuffed out in the way that we language things. So if you're the kind of person who might say, why bother with this explanation or with this investigation? Because X, because it's just an arising, because it's not me, um, because it's physical, because it has nothing to do with recognizing what you are. Those explaining away investigation, just listen, where does that come from? Fear, perhaps. Does it come from some ego that thinks it knows? What does it know? What do you know? Really? And if you hear your mind saying, well, I know this, is that an explanation that somehow stops you from actually investigating? Many times when I'm working with people, they'll say, well, I know this chronic pain is physical. I know this. So they're explaining it away. And then come to find out when we go explore it, it's really about, okay, I'm pissed at mom, but I can never say it, or dad scared the shit out of me. And I just have never been able to really feel that fear. Or my mother died when I was 10, and I have never grieved that. Like, that's real stuff. So, in what ways are you explaining things away for yourself? Just listen for that for a while. When you're talking to other people or even talking to self talk, are you using the non dual pointers to explain away experience and categorize it and label it as this is an arising, this is awareness, and just making it fairly mental? Or are you in the looking, the direct experiential living and looking and investigating and seeing what is here? There's a huge difference. Nobody said this to me, but I wish they had said it to me. I wish they would have said, Scott, listen to how your mind tries to explain something away as if you know something. And for me, I was explaining away, saying, well, this thing in my back is physical. Explaining away. Or, yeah, it's just an arising. It's not what I am. I'm awake to it. I can see it as an arising. Again, explaining it away. Even if that's true in my experience that it's an arising, it explains away the investigation. Listen to how you talk about all kinds of things. Listen to how you talk about emotions, because those can get explained away in non-duality, like anger, fear. These are just arisings. They're the ego. Just allow it. See that it's not you. But if you're someone who represses those things, then that is an explanation that explains it away. It will explain the repression work out of your experience just by the way that you're languaging things. For example, languaging things like, anger. I don't want to get angry. I don't want to hurt people. It's just not nice to be angry. And that's how you're explaining away an emotion that may be repressed. Listen to yourself talk about non-duality. Talk to yourself about it. Are you trying to explain away things? Categorize them, explain them away. What do you really know? I'm going to ask that question for myself, if you want to ask it. Because as far as I can tell, everything that I'm sharing about is stuff insight that was gained from the investigation. But what do I really know? If you sit with that question, it can stop you in your tracks. What do I really know? And then look from awareness. Yeah, maybe some thoughts come up. It reminds me of Byron Katie's work. Is that absolutely true? Whatever you think you know, is that absolutely true? And if it's not, then you can't hang your hat on that. So as you keep looking here, whatever concepts come up to try to explain away reality, you can just see them as that for a moment until you settle into that true not knowing. And for me, that's the beginner's mind, at least part of it, is where you come to something to investigate it, but you don't know. You don't know what it is. You don't know why it's here. You have no desire to explain it away. You're just looking into it, pure observation and inquiry to see what is there. And even when something comes up, then you're not explaining it away. For example, if you're feeling into the body and a thought comes up, I'm unsafe from old trauma or something, you're not there and just saying, well, there's no self to be unsafe and just explaining it away. No, you're like, I'm unsafe from awareness, direct experience. Those words, I'm not safe. Let those be. Or Dad thought I was a failure. When you discover those things, doing somatic programming, the explaining away doesn't really help you because on some level it's believed, even if it's an old thing from way back, the body remembers and keeps the score for that. So when it comes up, Dad didn't love me, that's believed on some level. Even if your conscious mind, adult mind, doesn't really buy into it, your body remembers it. So it doesn't help in that moment when that comes up just to say that there's no self or to insert something from your resume to explain it away. Instead, just be with it in a bare naked way. There it is. Dad thought I was a failure. Observing it directly, seeing it for what it is. And then there can be the insight that that's not you. But if you try to explain it away too early, you may not have the real insight, the real seeing of how it's not you. You may just be actually, by explaining these things away, you might be reinforcing a repression or something that's unresolved in your body. That's why it actually becomes dangerous. Dangerous. Because if you're dealing with something that is in any way threatening your life, because you're suicidal or maybe the disease itself in some way threatens your life, if someone around you is a showstopper, that's dangerous. Because they might stop your investigation, and then you may end up killing yourself. Or dying of disease where it wasn't necessary, that it had to do with something emotional and psychological. That's where it gets dangerous. Any kind of programming can be dangerous, even if it's spiritual programming. Telling people that their trauma is happening to no one can be dangerous, because that can be a showstopper. Nobody who's trauma informed in the world of the clinical world would ever think that that's a good idea, just to explain away trauma so that it doesn't get resolved or even managed, regulated. It's just sort of explained away. That kind of thing. What do you really know as you sit here? What do you really know about that stomach right now that has all those issues with it? Digestive problems, pain, nausea. What do you really know about your bad shoulder? What do you really know? Like, if you sit here and you do not rely on anything that you've learned, nothing. Like, you don't listen to any of the showstoppers who try to tell you what's there, and you stand in the integrity of, like, I want to discover what is there. But the minute you say that you know what is there before you go, that's where the stubbornness is. Really, a live inquiry looks like this. It's like you don't have your resume with you when you're doing it. So you're just sitting and exploring with skill. Your resume, in terms of what you've seen, the shifts that you've had, the insights, none of that. And in the moment, it's simply looking from awareness to find out what's actually here. True beginner's mind. That's where the deep exploration happens. So as you sit here with me, the practice right now is just look at what you think you know. Listen to the thoughts that come up that really are resistance to being open. Resistance to being open. I was at a retreat. It was a conference actually in Lethbridge, Canada, at a college. And it was a group of healers and teachers that came and gave talks. I was one of them. But I was sitting in the audience for one of them, and it was a healer that was channeling some being, and that was she was healing, or at least that was the thing that she was saying she was doing, and she invited the audience to join in on the thing. So she said, this net is going to come down. You can't see it. This net's going to come down over the audience. I just want you to feel that. This is really like she was going through all this. And in my mind, because there was not an openness at that time, I didn't have that, the openness that I have now, frankly. It was like the ego still thought it knew something about, you know, still holding on to, I know the nature of reality. And so there's a closeness. And so she called me out. She called me out. She said, I don't think you're open to this. I think that you're doing something and that's affecting the healing here. And I thought, It doesn't matter whether the healing is genuine or not. The point is she's pointing to my closeness. And then she pointed to the closeness in a few other people who happen to be non-dual teachers. But that's just an example of how if you think you know something, you won't be open. So an openness would be, can I just explore what she's doing and be open to see what happens, just to be curious, like without coming in with the I know mind. I already know. There is no self. It's all illusory. So this disease isn't even real. There's nobody there. So there's, that kind of thing. Past lives. Another area that I wasn't open because I didn't come through the Buddhist tradition or those traditions that talk about past lives. So it's like, I just thought I knew already. But then the past life situation came up for me, and I've shared about that. And just being open to investigate that openness is what helped there. Had I just said, well, there is no past life, or tried to explain it away in a certain way, I would not have been able to integrate the messages and the insights that were available to me from the appearance of that past life figure. You see how closeness just affects everything. If you've been listening to me with regard to the repression, if you think you already know, things like I don't repress anything, that mind that thinks it already knows is a showstopper. Or you hear in awakening things like, what's the point of dealing with trauma? That's an example of closeness. Because when you rather be interested in what's actually here and what the word trauma is pointing to, and whether that's something that you experience, wouldn't you be more interested in actually finding out directly from looking than just deciding something in the beginning and saying there's no investigation to be had, explaining trauma away? Same thing happens with the awakening process. We awaken to true nature, and then our mind thinks it knows, and then it might become closed to the embodiment of that, to further unfolding, refinements, deepening, integrating. But at the point at which you have this recognition that there's no self, and then you hold that again as like, I know, then you won't be open. For a while, when I left the 12, this is just an example, I'm calling myself out on my own closeness. This is why I can talk about openness, because I've seen the closeness in myself and where it comes from. And it doesn't come from clarity. But when I left the 12-step program, for a while, when I went back to 12-step meetings, when I thought I knew, hanging on still to the concepts of non-duality or presence, being in those rooms and listening to them talk the 12-step speak, it'd be like, I already know. So I couldn't even hear them. So it was like closeness masquerading as freedom. Going into that room and not even being able to hear people because my own framework around things was too loud. But now when I go to a meeting, it's just like curious, like, okay, what's this person going to share? Oh, that's beautiful. That's it. Now what's this person going to share? Open to hear it, to be in that experience without judgment, like truly without judgment. Just open to hear perspectives. There's much less suffering in that for everyone. What about sitting and talking to someone? Let's say you've moved or transcended out of like the belief in, God as some entity out there who's governing over our lives in certain ways. Maybe you've moved beyond that and you might think, well, anyone who still believes that is deluded, which is fine because maybe you have seen through that. But then how are you closed when you sit down in a coffee shop with that person who believes maybe even dogmatic things about God or whatever? In what way do you bring closeness to the conversation where your insights try to trump their insights? And it's just one ego trying to win out on another one in the name of spirituality because you think you know. But it's a really delicious experience to just sit down with somebody without thinking you know anything about anything and just listening and engaging with them on that level, whatever that is, hearing their perspective fully. And if you're really clean, when they're sharing their perspective, it doesn't threaten you in any way. It's actually just like someone painting a picture next to you. It's like, oh, wow, it looks like that with those colors and those features and that mountain and that beach. They're telling you how they see reality, but you can't see their painting if you have this really fixed view of reality yourself, closed. I think it's fairly easy when we start to realize and kind of create a fortress around us, where it's like what we think we know becomes the new form of separation. And then closeness happens in the name of liberation. I had a conversation with my brother right after the realization for me. The non dual realization was probably a conversation that happened in like 2007, which was really fresh after the awakening experience. And he was sharing from a more orthodox view of Christianity at that time and really holding on to these concepts of God and his relationship to God. And I just fought him on it, not letting him have his experience because I thought I knew something. So that broke down easily, and there's no communication in that argument. He was identified with certain things. I was apparently identified with certain things about not being identified with things, and then there was no communication. It was just same old separation in a different form. And that would have been coming from ignorance. And it was, for me, coming from ignorance. I remember when I was diagnosed with cancer, people came out of the woodwork to try to help me. And a lot of what they were saying is that you should consider changing your diet, like taking sugar all the way out. But again, because I thought I knew something, I got triggered around that a little bit based on my own conditioning. There was something in my own conditioning having to do with that allowed me not to hear them. This is another example of closeness. And some of my closeness came from the non dual programming. Because in certainly still holding on to some of that, it's like anything that doesn't fit within that, you're wasting my time or something. Like, it's kind of arrogant actually. But to just sit and listen to them paint that picture. After doing inquiry, they're just painting this picture of taking sugar out of your diet and what that might do, and just listening to them and hearing them, finally hearing them without any defense or without thinking that I know anything. And they get to paint that picture for me. So imagine how enriching that is for relationships when we no longer hold on ourselves to this idea that anything out there is fixed or objective. Like we've really seen through it, and we've seen through our most precious beliefs and frameworks. So even if we have a framework, we have a way of thinking about things, even that is held lightly. Imagine how enriching that is in relationship, because then you can actually really hear people. Because how can you hear people if you think you know? Because then you're always interpreting what they're saying through that filter. Like, oh no, that doesn't fit within my paradigm. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. And you're just constantly comparing what they're saying. It's almost like you're comparing two paintings. So here's my view of things. Here's my painting. And then the person next to you says, well, this is my view of things. This is my painting. And you look at the two paintings and you go, no to your painting, because it doesn't quite fit with my painting. And there can only be one painting here. And I think it's going to have to be mine, because it's the true painting. See it? But what instead if I have my painting, but it's held very lightly, and there's a knowing that my painting isn't the ultimate painting, it's just another illusory thing held very lightly, so that when you begin painting, I don't even have to refer to mine. I can just be quiet and instead enjoy yours for a moment. Like, let you paint that perspective, because you already see there's nothing objective. So it's like they're just painting things into reality. You're going, oh, interesting. They paint that perspective for you, and you take that perspective fully, because you're not holding on to one tightly here. It's just a rough metaphor, but you can see it. So listen to how you explain things away. Listen to your language. Listen to how you close yourself off to experiencing someone else's painting fully, in the way that they paint it, not in the way that you want it to be painted or that you think it should be painted, but how they experience it. This has been really helpful in my marriage, because my husband has views that I don't have. He's much younger than me. In some ways, he's more educated about some worldly things because he pays attention to those things. But he has some pretty strong views of things. And if I would come to him with that sort of non dual knowing, saying, yeah, all this stuff is just illusion, like you're lost, then what I'm doing is I'm choosing my painting as a way to snuff out his. And there's no openness. And then that creates conflict and lack of intimacy. And the union is threatened by that. Well, at least it seems like that. But then when I can just hear him, and it's been my practice really in both marriages, but this one especially, is the practice of really allowing myself to go into his world and honoring that as he's painting that picture. It's very connecting. It's lovely, actually, to be with someone that way, where you're not trying to get your painting to win out. Because again, you know that there's no objective reality, so there's nothing to defend on your side. Nothing. There's an enormous amount of love that can come from that way of relating. But here's the tricky part, is that if you're a peacemaker ego, you have to be careful, because the peacemaker ego will masquerade as that kind of freedom. So it'll just agree with people. Like, oh yeah, yeah, I see that. Yeah, I agree with that. That the way you see that is the way I see it. Acquiescing, people pleasing. I can see all viewpoints, people will say. I can see everybody's viewpoint. That can maybe coming from just peacemaker identity, like afraid of conflict, afraid of speaking your voice. And so it can masquerade as like looking like a deep realization, but it's really just coming from the fear of conflict or the fear of being annihilated. Um, if you truly express your opinion or if you disagree with someone. So please don't mistake what I'm saying for peacemaker ego. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about seeing another perspective in the way that gets painted for you. And you don't even have to agree or disagree. It's about experiencing it. It's like, are you that open? Are you open enough to let someone else paint your picture of reality where you don't have to defend your own? Not because you're trying to make peace with the person, but because you're really that clear. energetically people feel that. So if you come to them really holding tight on your viewpoint, whatever it is, they're going to feel that. There's going to be a defense to you because energetically you're bringing that kind of energy, that convincing energy. But when you come with a different energy where someone energetically can feel that you don't hold on to your view tightly, that opens the door for them. That's a different energy to be around. They don't have to defend themselves anymore. They don't have to attack you. So it's transformative for them to be around you. But the other part of it is that you can even express your perspective. But if you're not holding on to it tightly, again, you're not believing that what you're saying is truly objectively real. It's just a perspective. So you can share it. But the energy of that is holding it lightly. So it's not actually, it's not threatening. And people can feel that, I think, more than understand it. They can feel what it's like to be around that kind of clarity. So do I get hooked up every now and then in believing that there's something that I see that is inherent and then not being open? Sure. That's how I come to talk about this stuff, is by seeing it myself with my brother, for example, or different instances with my husband, seeing how that reinforces separation and then just investigating that so that the openness is there. I want to say one more thing before I go, because this was a life changer for me to hear this from someone, and I've shared it before. But there's a difference between the spirit of inquiry and convincing energy. So convincing energy is where there's still some attachment to a perspective. Like you still believe that your thoughts on some level are still true, even if they're spiritual thoughts. So, or whatever they are. The energy by which you try to convince other people that your view is correct is really opposite of the energy or the spirit of inquiry. With inquiry, it's just a curiosity and an openness to investigate. That's all that it is. It's very light, though. The energy of that is very different. It's not trying to convince anyone of anything, not trying to convince others that your thoughts or your beliefs, even your thoughts about inquiry, are the only real thoughts. Even the convincing energy is gone, or you're aware of it when it comes up and inquiring into that. And what takes over is instead, it's not just awareness, but it's awareness with a curiosity and openness, like beginner's mind, that isn't about trying to convince other people of anything. It's about just being open to the investigation, to see what's here. You can see that if you just listen to the way I explain that. Now go around people, get into chat forums online around spirituality or whatever else, or at retreats or something, and listen to how people either have convincing energy behind what they're saying or they don't. And when they don't, that feels energetically very different. When you're with in the company of someone who's has that openness, it's a completely different energy than the convincing energy, which feels closed. I'm just using dualistic concepts here to make a point. Energetically, that feels very different. Convincing energy comes in with conclusions and loves its conclusions. It's like, okay, some investigation has been done or something, and I've concluded that A and B are true. Conclusion. Where the spirit of inquiry doesn't land on conclusions, in that knowing that they're not absolutely true, but being open to investigating where you're landing. So you're landing on this idea, this program, this framework, this belief, this pointer, landing, and then trying to convince yourself and others that that's absolutely true. So just watch for how you land. A lot of times in inquiry, I'm pointing in that way. I'm saying as things arise and fall, instead of landing on that next viewpoint and making a self out of it, or whatever. Can you just see it for what it is and not land there? Let it come and go. That's the spirit of that awakeness, that inquiry that doesn't land, it doesn't trying to land anywhere solidly. That's exhilarating and liberating. But landing is not really liberating and exhilarating. It's for the ego, where we land somewhere for safety, for security, to protect ourselves. We land in some idea, and we don't even realize that we're doing that for safety or security or self-protection or avoidance or something. But it isn't alive, and it feels not alive. And even though it might help you feel safer and more secure to land on some idea or some program, ultimately to land there, it might feel safe. But that feeling that you're getting safety from there is pointing to a fear that hasn't been resolved yet within yourself. Because why would you need to feel safe by landing somewhere if you didn't feel fearful to begin with? So the spirit of inquiry doesn't land. It doesn't say, I'm just going to land on fear and seek safety in this program, this belief. It goes deeper than that. It's like, no, I'm going to investigate that to see what is driving that landing. And usually you'll see that it's a fear. Because if you were to let go of that, whatever that is, it's like for a moment destabilizing. You can't find where's your ground, your landing point? Mind, not ground as awareness, but your mind. So we get afraid of that, right? And that's why we don't investigate it. So we stay in the convincing energy. See? So I'm just pointing to, can you inquire into the places that you've landed? That's all. Bye, guys.